I never expected my senior year chemistry lab to turn into such a life-changing experience. Looking back, it all seems like something out of a coming-of-age movie, the kind where the protagonist discovers something profound about themselves through an unexpected encounter. That's exactly what happened to me with Alex, my lab partner who I'd been paired with since the beginning of the semester. Let me take you through the whole story, because even now, months later, I still find myself thinking about that evening when everything changed. Alex was the definition of what you'd call a typical straight guy. Captain of the swim team, always talking about girls from his dorm, and wearing those annoyingly perfect fitted t-shirts that showed off his athletic build. We got along well enough in class, though we came from completely different social circles. I was more of the studious type, president of the science club, and quietly out to my close friends, but not making a big deal about my sexuality. Our professor had paired us together because, as she put it, Alex needs someone responsible to keep him on track, and you could use someone to help you loosen up a bit. I remember rolling my eyes at that comment, but over time, I had to admit she wasn't entirely wrong. We had established a decent working relationship over the semester. Alex wasn't actually bad at chemistry. He just pretended not to care as much as he actually did. I noticed how quickly he picked up concepts, though he'd downplay his intelligence around his friends. There was something refreshing about his laid-back approach to life that balanced out my sometimes too serious nature. Still, I never expected we'd become anything more than lab partners who occasionally texted about assignments. That all changed during our fluid dynamics unit. We were falling behind on our pressure experiments, mainly because Alex had missed a lab session for a swim meet. Our final report was due in 2 days, and we still needed to complete the practical portion and write up our findings. When Alex suggested staying after hours to finish up, I agreed without giving it much thought. The lab was usually open until 10 p.m. for seniors working on projects, and the teaching assistant had given us permission to use the equipment as long as we followed safety protocols. The campus felt different that evening. It was early November, and darkness had already settled by the time we met at 7 p.m. The science building was mostly empty, with just a few dedicated students scattered throughout the various labs. Our chemistry lab was completely deserted except for us, the overhead lights humming quietly as we set up our experiment. The emptiness created this strange bubble of intimacy I hadn't anticipated. "Thanks for doing this," Alex said as he arranged the glassware. "Coach would kill me if I failed chem and got kicked off the team." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound casual while being acutely aware of how his forearm muscles flexed as he adjusted the equipment. I need the grade too. I'd been fighting my attraction to Alex for months, and I'd gotten pretty good at compartmentalizing those feelings. Yes, he was handsome with his dark brown hair that always fell perfectly across his forehead, and yes, his green eyes had this intensity when he concentrated that made my stomach do flips. But he was straight, and I valued our partnership too much to make things awkward with an unwanted crush. Our experiment that night focused on measuring pressure differentials in various liquids and gases. We had several setups to test, including one that measured the pressure created by air being forced through different-sized openings. It was basic stuff, really, but required careful measurement and patience, something Alex sometimes struggled with. As the evening progressed, I noticed a shift in our usual dynamic. Away from the crowded daytime lab, Alex seemed more relaxed, more himself. He asked thoughtful questions about the experiment and shared stories about his family back in Colorado. I found myself opening up too, telling him about my plans for grad school and my worries about the future. There was an ease between us I hadn't experienced before, a connection that went beyond our usual surface-level conversations. About 2 hours into our work, we hit a snag with one of the pressure measurements. The readings weren't matching our predictions, and we couldn't figure out why. "Maybe there's a leak somewhere," I suggested, checking the connections between the tubes and the pressure gauge. Alex ran his hand through his hair, a habit I'd noticed he had when frustrated. "We've checked everything twice. The equipment must be faulty. Let's try a different approach," I said, thinking out loud. "We need to identify where the pressure is escaping." That's when Alex got this mischievous look in his eyes, the same one he'd get when he was about to suggest something our professor wouldn't approve of. "You know how we could test for leaks? My dad taught me this when we were fixing the pool pump last summer." "How?" I asked, genuinely curious. "With our mouths," he said simply. We can feel where air is escaping much better than these instruments can measure it. I nearly dropped the beaker I was holding. With our mouths. I repeated, my voice embarrassingly higher than usual. Alex laughed, clearly amused by my reaction. Not like that, dude. I mean, we can use our lips to feel for air escaping from the connections. It's like when you're trying to find a leak in a bike tire and you run your lips over the rubber to feel where the air is coming out. Oh, I said, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed. Yeah, that makes sense. Here, I'll show you. He offered, leaning over the apparatus. He brought his face close to one of the tube connections and gently moved his lips near the joint, not quite touching it, but close enough to feel any escaping air. See? Nothing here. I watched, transfixed by the concentration on his face, the way his lips parted slightly as he moved to another connection. There was something incredibly intimate about the whole scene that made my heart race. Your turn, he said, straightening up and gesturing to the other side of the equipment. Check those connections while I adjust the pressure. I hesitated for a moment before leaning down, mimicking his technique. As I moved my lips near the first connection, I felt nothing. The second was the same. But at the third joint, I felt a faint whisper of air against my skin. I think I found it, I said, not moving away. There's definitely air escaping here. Alex came around to my side, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and subtle that I'd noticed before, but never from this proximity. Let me check, he said, and before I could move, he was leaning down next to me, his face inches from mine as he tried to feel the leak I'd detected. Yeah, you're right, he confirmed, turning to look at me with a smile. Our faces were so close I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Neither of us moved for a moment, caught in some unspoken tension that seemed to fill the space between us. Alex broke the silence first. You know, there's another way to test pressure, he said, his voice quieter than before. What's that? I asked, barely breathing. With our mouths, he repeated, but this time the meaning was unmistakably different. Direct pressure. No instruments, no equipment. Just testing the pressure between two surfaces. I froze, certain I was misinterpreting his words. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Alex reached out and touched my face, his fingers lightly tracing my jawline. I've been thinking about this for a while, he admitted. About you. About us. My mind was racing, unable to process what was happening. But you're straight, I blurted out, immediately regretting how accusatory it sounded. Alex smiled, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. I thought so too. But lately, I'm not so sure. Especially when I'm around you. Before I could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips against mine. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was testing his own boundaries. Then, as I began to respond, the kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Alex rested his forehead against mine. That's what I meant by testing pressure with our mouths, he said with a small laugh. I couldn't help but laugh too, the tension of the moment breaking into something warmer, more comfortable. That was definitely not in the lab manual, I replied. No, he agreed, but it should be. Much more effective than any equipment. We stood there for a moment, both processing what had just happened. I had so many questions, so many thoughts swirling through my mind. Was this just an experiment for him? A college experience to try? Or was there something more genuine behind his actions? I don't want you to think this is just some, I don't know, experiment for me, Alex said, as if reading my thoughts. I've been confused about these feelings for a while. I just never had the courage to explore them before. Why now? I asked, needing to understand. He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. Being here with you, alone, away from everyone else, it felt right. Like I could finally be honest with myself. With you. We spent the next hour talking more openly than we ever had before. Alex told me about his struggles with his attraction to guys, how he'd pushed those feelings down for years, focusing instead on what was expected of him, dating girls, being the typical jock. I shared my own journey of self-discovery, the challenges of coming out to friends and family, the relief of finally being authentic. I'm not saying I have everything figured out, Alex admitted as we sat on the lab stools, our experiment temporarily forgotten. I don't know if I'm bi or just. I don't know. But I do know that I like you, more than as a lab partner or friend. The honesty in his voice touched something deep within me. I like you too, I confessed. Half for a while, actually. But I never thought it was a possibility. Alex reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. So what do we do now? It was a good question, one without an easy answer. We were both seniors, both heading in different directions after graduation. I had graduate school applications out, and Alex was talking about joining his father's business back in Colorado. Plus, he was still figuring out his sexuality, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be someone's experimental phase. We take it slow, I suggested. See where this goes without putting pressure on it. He nodded, seeming relieved by my response. I'd like that, and maybe we could keep it between us for now, while I figure things out. I understood his request, even though part of me felt a twinge of disappointment. Coming out was a personal journey, and everyone deserved to take it at their own pace. Of course, I agreed. This is your story to tell when you're ready. We eventually returned to our experiment, though the atmosphere had changed completely. There was a new awareness between us, small touches and glances that carried meaning they hadn't before. Surprisingly, we worked even better together, finishing the experiment with better results than I think either of us expected. As we cleaned up the lab, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Would Alex regret what happened? Would he act differently around me in class? Stop overthinking, Alex said, catching my worried expression. I can practically hear your brain working overtime. I smiled sheepishly. That obvious, huh? Only to me, he replied, and then leaned in to kiss me again, this time with more confidence. I meant what I said. This isn't just a one-time thing for me. Over the next few weeks, Alex and I developed a relationship that existed in stolen moments, study sessions that turned into makeout sessions, late nights in empty classrooms talking about our futures, text messages that made me smile in the middle of lectures. We kept things private as Alex had asked, which sometimes felt like we were living in our own secret world. It wasn't always easy. Alex still struggled with his identity, sometimes pulling away when his confusion became overwhelming. I had my own insecurities, wondering if this was just a phase for him, if eventually he'd decide he was straight after all and leave me behind. But each time those doubts crept in, he'd find a way to reassure me, to show me that his feelings were real, even if he was still figuring out what they meant. By the end of the semester, we'd not only aced our chemistry project, but had also built something neither of us had expected when we first became lab partners. Alex had started coming out to a few close friends, taking small steps toward embracing this part of himself. I had learned to be patient, to understand that everyone's journey is different, and that sometimes the most unexpected connections turn out to be the most meaningful. I don't know what the future holds for us. Alex is talking about looking at graduate programs near where I'll be studying, but we're both realistic about the challenges ahead. What I do know is that a simple suggestion to test pressure with our mouths changed both our lives in ways we never could have anticipated. Sometimes I think about that empty lab, about how different things might have been if we hadn't stayed late that night, if Alex hadn't found the courage to act on his feelings, if I hadn't been open to the possibility. Science is all about discovery, testing hypotheses, observing reactions, drawing conclusions from evidence. But the most important experiment I conducted in that lab had nothing to do with fluid dynamics and everything to do with the chemistry between two people who found each other when they least expected it. So if there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that sometimes the most significant discoveries happen when you're not looking for them, when you're simply open to the possibilities that present themselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, those discoveries can change your life in the most beautiful ways. Total _char_count, 17,428.